Imagine a name that the whole world knows. A name spoken in London, New York, Tokyo, and on small stages in towns where no one has ever heard of kings. But behind this name is silence. No portrait that we can call authentic. Only scraps of records, gossip, and works that are too large to fit into one human biography. For 4 centuries, people have argued. Who was he really? A genius, a self-taught, the shadow of another author? Or, perhaps, a fiction behind which someone was hiding? I never sought fame. It found me, quietly, without warning, like the mist that envelopes a city before dawn. I did not want my words to endure for centuries, to be debated by scholars and quoted by lovers. I simply wanted to tell a story. One, then another, and another, for words were the only thing I could hold in my hands when life eluded me. My pen knew no luxury of time. I wrote because I would have suffocated otherwise. My writings were not embellished for the great. They were born from the noise of the markets, the songs of the taverns, and the whispers of those who feared to speak aloud. But the strange thing is that my first words on stage brought me not joy, but fear. The audience laughed and applauded, and then someone in the corridor told me that the play was dangerous, that it contained too much truth for those in power. I felt like I was being watched, not by the audience, but by those whose gaze does not forgive mistakes. And then I realized that theater is not just entertainment. It is a battlefield where words are sharper than swords. You might think I was born for the stage, but I wasn't. I didn't choose it. It chose me, and I don't think it'll ever let me go. But if you want to know how a boy from rural Stratford ended up in the heart of London, surrounded by intrigue and the limelight, you have to go back to where it all began. You probably think that the path to the stage begins with the light of the stage and the sound of applause. But mine began with silence, a thick, sticky silence in which you can hear the creak of my father's pen on rough leather and smell the dampness oozing from the wooden walls. I was born not among the glitter and the crowds, but in little Stratford-upon-Avon, where the river flowed slowly, as if afraid of waking anyone. My childhood smelled of leather, because my father was a glover, and of ink, because I liked to sneak a peek into his notes. He never said I had to be someone great. He wanted me to be someone reliable. But I already had a dangerous habit of listening to people as if every word they said could become a story. I loved to eavesdrop on conversations in the market, when mothers haggled over the price of bread, or when men in taverns relieved their tension by telling stories about other people's sins. I didn't realize that I was doing anything special. I was just collecting words the way others collect coins. And yet my life could have been very different if one day a traveling theater troupe had not come to town. They did not perform in palaces. All they needed was a space between 2 houses and a few boards to make a stage. I stood in the crowd, fascinated by how a person could become different simply by saying different words in a different way. I saw the crowd laugh and fall silent, and for the first time I felt, there is a power in words that can control hearts. That evening I came home with a strange feeling in my chest. And even though I was only 11, I knew that someday I too would want to have that kind of power. But childhood dreams are fragile. They are easily shattered by everyday life. At 17, I fell in love. Not with a muse, not with a stage, but with a girl named Anne Hathaway. She was 8 years older than me, had a deep gaze and a quiet self-confidence that I lacked at the time. And when we found out we were expecting a child, there was no choice. I became a husband and a father faster than I had time to figure out who I wanted to be. You might think that this put a stop to my dreams. On the contrary, it was then that they became even more dangerous. Because now I wasn't writing just for myself. I was writing to escape. And when our first child was only a few months old, I began to think about London. It felt like a betrayal to leave my family for a fleeting hope, but it was worse to stay and watch life slowly close in around me. Here, perhaps, it is worth confessing, my first years after marriage are a blank spot even for me. Chroniclers will call them Shakespeare's lost years. No one knows exactly where I was or what I did, and sometimes I think that is a good thing. Because some beginnings are too dirty to be recorded in history. I worked as I could, as a clerk, as a teacher, sometimes even as a deer hunter on estates where I was not at all happy to be seen. But wherever I found myself, I collected stories. Words stuck to me like dust to boots. And then one day I woke up with a decision that would change everything. I was going to London. I had no money, no connections, and my only baggage was a few poems and the first drafts of plays written on cheap paper. I walked along rivers, slept in barns, sometimes in the open air, and every step was filled with the fear that I was simply crazy. London was vast, dangerous, and foreign, but there was a fire burning inside me that could not be extinguished. When I first saw the city, it struck me with its noise. It didn't have the quiet of Stratford. Every street was alive, bustling, challenging you. Theaters stood next to taverns, and above it all the smells of fish, smoke, and human sweat. It was a world in which only those who could hold the attention of a crowd survived. And I knew I had to become one of them. But London didn't welcome me with open arms. The first months were cold and hungry. I shared a room with actors who were constantly fighting over roles, and at night I rehearsed lines that were never mine. I was an extra, a shadow on the stage while my words remained in my pocket. And yet I waited. I saw real playwrights at work, how they forged a reputation with each new production. And with each night, as I rewrote the scenes, imagining how they would come to life, I understood my turn would come. It came unexpectedly. One of the actors who was supposed to play the main role fell ill. I was cast in his place because I was the only one who knew all his lines. I learned them by listening backstage. And although the play was not a great success, it was a signal to me. I could be not only an actor, but also a writer. That evening, when I returned to my little room, I spread out all my drafts in front of me and began to write as if it were my last night. My first real creation was not a masterpiece, but it was mine. And when, trembling, I handed the text to the director of the troupe, I saw something new in his eyes: curiosity. It was the first step, still tiny, but already in the right direction. I did not know that ahead of me lay intrigue, betrayal, prohibitions, and a fame that would be as dangerous as it was seductive. But then, in London, amidst the noise of the streets and the smell of the raw wood of the stage, I felt for the first time my life no longer belonged to me. It belonged to words. And if you think this is the culmination of my story, you are mistaken. In fact, it was just the beginning. They said I was crazy. No one runs away from Stratford just like that. Everyone here knows who you are, whose son you are, how many leather gloves your father made, and who you married. Life here is like a closed circle, and everyone is happy that it is closed. But I was suffocating in this circle. The night I left was moonless. I didn't say goodbye to Anne. Not out of indifference, quite the opposite. I was afraid that if I looked her in the eye, I would stay. I took only the bare essentials: a few sheets of my poems, a pen, a knife, and a handkerchief wrapped in a few coins. I was wearing an old jacket that smelled of smoke, and shoes that had long since been asked to be put to rest. I walked quickly for the first few miles, almost running. Stratford was behind me, and ahead was the road to the city where anything was possible, or where you would be lost forever. The road led through fields, woods, and villages where no one knew me. I slept in barns, sometimes in roadside inns, where I paid for the night with stories I made up on the spot. People loved to listen to stories, especially those that seemed plausible but were spiced with fiction. Sometimes they even offered me a mug of ale for it. On the third day of my journey, I came across a group of actors. They were standing by the roadside trying to fix a cart that was stuck in the mud. I helped them, and in gratitude they invited me to share a dinner with them by the fire. We talked, and for the first time I felt that I was not alone. They talked about London, its scenes, its noise, the fights for the best seats in the hall. And although most of their words were exaggerations, I drank them in like water to a hungry man. One of the actors, an old man named Garrett, listened intently as I casually quoted a few lines from my own play. He laughed and said, "Boy, you sound like a man who wants more than just to live." "I want to write," I replied. He looked at me as if he recognized something familiar in me and said, "Then remember, in London words either feed you or kill you." When we said goodbye, he gave me a small piece of parchment with an address. "If you get there, look for this man. He knows where to find those who listen to new voices." I was drawn forward. But London was not the end of the journey. It was the beginning of the most dangerous part. When I reached the city, it struck me with such smells and noise that I almost turned back. Narrow streets, full of people hurrying about their business, the shouts of merchants, the ringing of church bells, and, above all, the stench of canals and markets. I stopped on the bridge and looked out at the River Thames. It was gray, dirty, But there was something magnetic about it, like the city itself. I found the address Garrett had given me. It was a dark tavern in a corner where the patrons looked at you as if they were considering whether you might be worth a few shillings if you were sold for enlistment in the Navy. There I met a man called Nicholas. He was short, with a sly squint and his hands that kept moving as if he were counting. He listened to me, at first bored, but as I began to read a few scenes his eyes became more attentive. "You have something," he said at last. "But in London it's not enough. Here you need not only words, but teeth." He offered me a job as an assistant at a small theater on the South Shore. It wasn't the fame I had dreamed of, but it was an entrance into the world I longed to enter. I carried sets, cleaned costumes, repaired props. In my spare time, I watched actors rehearse, directors argue over every line, and I wrote it all down in my memory. One evening, when the play was canceled due to rain, I found myself in a tavern with the troupe. The wine was flowing, the conversation was loud, and someone challenged me. "Well, Shakespeare, if you're so clever with your notes, show me what you can do." I stood up and began to improvise a scene. Not from a ready-made piece, just on the spot. The actors picked up the game, and we acted out a little drama that made the whole tavern fall silent and then burst into laughter. Nicholas, who was sitting in the corner, smiled. "Tomorrow you will bring me something written," he said. That night I wrote until dawn. It was a small play, rough and imperfect, but it had what I felt: hunger, tension, passion. A week later we put it on stage. It wasn't a sensation, but people started talking about me. And that was enough for the doors to start opening. I didn't know then that in London every open door hides a trap. Do you think that first success is a relief? That it opens the door for you and leaves it open? No. It only opens it for a moment, and then someone starts closing it from the other side, and you struggle to get your foot through the crack so it doesn't get caught. My little play, staged at the Nicholas Theater, brought me my first coppers and a few interested glances. But at the same time it provoked the wrath of those who considered the stage their territory. In London, theaters were like street gangs, each with its own audience, its own authors, and its own watchdogs, ready to bite the throat of anyone who came without permission. The first threat was winter. The theaters were closed because of the plague that had swept through the city. The public feared crowds, and those who had any means fled to the villages. The actors were left without work, and I without food. I sold the pin I had brought from Stratford to buy bread. For several days I lived on turnip soup and drank cold water from the well near the inn where I spent the night. When the plague subsided, the theater opened with renewed vigor. Nicholas entrusted me with writing another play, this time a longer one. I worked like a madman, but when it came on stage, there sat in the audience a man who had changed everything. His name was Richard Baines, and he was the author at court. He had enough power to ruin anyone's career with just a few words. After the performance, he came up to me, smiling, but there was something predatory in his eyes. "I wonder," he said, "where a country boy gets such words. Aren't you afraid they might be taken away?" The following week, my play was banned. Officially, because of indecent scenes and critical allusions to the state system. Unofficially, because Baines whispered a few phrases to the right people. I was left with nothing again. For several nights, I slept on the floor of the theater until the order came to evict me. There is nothing colder in London than a stone under your back on a winter's night. Then I remembered Garrett's advice. In London, words either feed you or kill you. To survive, I started writing anonymously for other writers. They signed my texts with their names, got money and fame, and I got a few coins and a chance not to starve. Humiliating? Yes, but it was toughening. I was once hired as a language consultant for a small troupe that performed in inns. We traveled over swampy roads, performing for drunken sailors, prisoners, and soldiers. One evening, tragedy struck when a spectator threw a knife at me during a performance. The blade flew inches from my head and stuck in the wall. We fled the village at night without receiving our pay. When I returned to London, things had changed. The theater world was buzzing with talk about a new speaking ghost who was writing scripts with brilliant dialogue. The rumor reached Baines, and he decided to expose me. His plan was simple: lure me to a meeting, offer me a lucrative job at court, and then accuse me of plagiarism or even treason. But I refused. I realized that the power was not in letting me into their circle, but in creating my own. And I found an ally, the theater owner James Burbage. He saw in me a chance to revive his theater and promised to stage my new play without censorship. We worked at night, often under threat of inspections, because any hint of politics could ruin us. The premiere was a risk. If it failed, I would be on the street again. If it was popular, I would not only gain an audience, but also twice as many enemies. It was raining the day of the performance, but the house was full. When the curtain fell after the final scene, the reaction was explosive. People were applauding, screaming, some even crying. And amidst the noise, I saw Baines in the crowd. He stood still, with the same predatory smile, but now there was something different about it, an acknowledgement that I had survived. But I already knew, the real tests were still ahead. Because the higher you climb, the more hands reach out to pull you down. Fame is a candle in the darkness. It attracts the attention of those who love the light, and those who want to put it out. After the success with Burbage, my name began to appear on the posters more often. The audience came even in the rain. The actors argued about who would get the main role in my new plays. I had enough to pay for my roof and bread. It would seem that the dream had come true. But with each performance, I felt something invisible squeezing me from the sides. At first, it was little things. Actors suddenly forgot lines in key scenes. Costumes disappeared before premieres. Sets broke just before going on stage. Then strange encounters began. One evening, as I was walking home down a narrow street, a stranger in a dark cloak stopped me. He handed me a piece of paper and disappeared without saying a word. The paper only said, "You write too freely. Be careful with your tongue." I knew that there was a censorship office in London, the so-called Master of Entertainments. He had the right to ban any play if it touched on the royal court or religious themes. But I never paid attention to these restrictions. For me, the stage was a place where you could tell the truth, even if you wrapped it in the costume of comedy or historical drama. And that was probably what caused the first real trouble. One day, royal messengers came to the theater. They handed Burbage an official order to stop the performance of my new play, which had not even been published yet. The document stated that the work contained scenes capable of inciting the subjects against the legitimate government. I was ordered to appear for questioning. The interrogation took place in a gloomy office with a narrow window. There sat a man with cold, almost glassy eyes. He leafed through my manuscripts for a long time, sometimes underlining lines with a quill pen. "You are alluding to the king," he said, "even if this takes place in Rome 2,000 years ago." I replied that the truth in drama is always universal, and he only smiled. It is a dangerous truth. I was allowed to leave, but on the condition that every text I wrote would be reviewed. It was like a noose around my neck. Any word could be a reason for a ban or even arrest. But the enemies were not only official. A new actor named Giles had joined the troupe. He seemed talented, but I soon noticed that he was constantly following me, asking about future plots, rummaging through my papers. Once I found him in the pantry, where he was leafing through my new manuscript. When he saw me, he smiled. "I just wanted to practice on your text." A week later, this manuscript appeared on the stage of another theater, under the name of Richard Baines. I almost went crazy with rage. But it was impossible to prove the theft. In London at that time, copyright existed only on paper, not in the courts. At this time, rumors of a conspiracy against the Queen were spreading in the city. Several poets and playwrights were arrested for participating in secret clubs where they discussed politics. And suddenly my name also appeared on the lists of suspects. I began to be called for interrogations, sometimes in the middle of the night. Once I was kept for 3 days without food, so that I would confess to something I had not done. I realized that they wanted to force me to remain silent forever. Or, even worse, to write for commission, glorifying those who now wanted to destroy my freedom. And then I took a risk. I began working on a play that was not just entertaining, but also hid behind layers of symbols so deep that the censors couldn't get a hold of it, and the audience still understood the subtext. That was my weapon, ambiguity. The premiere was a triumph. People laughed where I hid the bitter truth, and applauded where the words were thrown as a challenge to the authorities. But I knew, those who were watching me understood everything. And when I returned home after the performance, I found a new note on the door. It consisted of only 3 words. "Next time, silence." I learned long ago to distinguish the noise of the crowd. There is sincere applause when people laugh or cry with the actors. There is a cold hum of curiosity when they expect a scandal. But there is another, dangerous. It is quiet, like the breath before the blow. That is what I have felt in recent months. After that note, I almost stopped going out into the city. I only went to the theater and back. I wrote at night, hiding drafts under the floorboards. Even Burbage did not know what I was working on. For now, every letter of mine could be a reason for accusations of treason. One evening I was stopped by the same man with the cold eyes who had interrogated me once. "Mr. Shakespeare," he said quietly, "you are living too dangerously. Stop." "If I stop, the theater will stop," I replied. "The theater will survive without you. And you, without caution, will not." I knew he was right, but I also knew something else. If I remained silent, I would not even be remembered. I would be erased like chalk from a blackboard. And I decided to stage one last play. The one I had been writing in secret, composing words like a code that would open doors only to those who could see beyond the scenery. There were kings who were afraid of their own shadows, generals who lost battles before they even took up the sword, and jesters who spoke the truth, laughing in the face of those who could have ordered their execution. The premiere took place at night. The doors were closed. Only the chosen ones were invited. I stood backstage and listened as the hall froze at every line. It was unlike any of my performances. There was no entertainment there, only the naked truth, hidden in insults. After the final words, I didn't go out to bow. I didn't want to see who was applauding in the hall and who was waiting to grab me. I quietly left through the back door and walked into the darkness. They say I was seen several more times after that night, in Tavistock, a small village in the north. They say I died there in peace. But only my writings know the truth. And now, as you read or watch them, remember, every phrase, every monologue is not just fiction. This is my voice, which has managed to pass through censorship, conspiracies, betrayals, and fear. My final challenge to those who wanted me to be silent. And if ever in a dark theater hall it seems to you that someone nearby is quietly whispering the words you hear from the stage, don't be afraid. It's just me. I've always been here. And I always will be.